All right, as we stated earlier, it's awesome to have Colin O'Brady on the Marty Smith Podcast here. Let me try to run down the world's most impressive resume. All right, this dude holds 10 world records. He summited Mount Everest twice. He even had the wherewithal and the awareness to Snapchat from there for 20 million people. His first book, The Impossible First, is a New York Times bestseller. His second book, The 12-Hour Walk, is due out today. I recently received a copy, Colin, and read a good chunk of it. I've not finished it yet. It's a super interesting concept that ultimately lands, in my estimation, on self-awareness and presence in the constant clutter of today's world that we're all managing, and recalibrating the mind from can't to can, haves to have-nots, haves over have-nots, half empty, to half full. And I was really taken by what I've read so far. So let's just start at the ground level foundation, brother. Where and how did you grow up, and what led to your fascinating interest in exploration?
Yeah, well, it's great to be here with you guys. I kind of came into this world in a somewhat untraditional context. I was actually born on a hippie commune in Olympia, Washington, with 30 people at a home birth, with my mom playing Bob Marley Redemption song on repeat. So you could say...
Okay, that's a good introduction to the world right there, Hoss.
Exactly. So people were partying, hanging out, and, I was born playing some music. So... That's how I came into the world. But yeah, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, mostly Portland, Oregon. So spent a lot of time out there. My family didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, but my dad always used to say, the outdoors are free. He's an Eagle Scout, and so he'd say, let's drive out to a trailhead. Let's go to an alpine lake. Let's go for a walk. Let's go for a bike ride, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't as if he was taking me to Antarctica to walk across solo like I eventually did, or things like that. But he certainly piqued my interest by just kind of exploring nature in Oregon, and that certainly laid a foundation for many of the expeditions and things that I've done over the course of my life.
So when did all the wild-ass explorations become a calling for you?
Yeah, it's kind of been iterative over time. My first big world record project was in 2016, so it wasn't until I was about 30 years old. So it's been it's been iterative over time. But if I could think about a massive turning point in my life that sort of moved in one direction or the other, I would say. When I was just after college, I had always wanted to travel. I wanted to adventure. Like I said, I didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, but I saved up painting houses in the summer, and I decided to go for a trip around the world after I graduated college. Took a backpack, took a surfboard, and went into the world for a little bit of an adventure. Again, it was on the cheap, man. It was like the cheapest student travel, you with like the longest layovers, and hitchhiking, sleeping on random people's floors, saving up just enough money to have some beers at night and mess around. Like it was that kind of but it was, you're young out in the world. It's fun. All until I found myself on this small beach in rural Thailand, and I end up deciding to jump a flaming jump rope because, I'm 22 years old, and that looks like a good idea. What could possibly go wrong? You're invincible at that point in your life, right? And unfortunately, in an instant, my life changed. Natural consequences stuck in. That rope wrapped around my legs and lit my body completely on fire to my neck. Fortunately, I jumped in the ocean, which saved my life, but not before 25% of my body was severely burned, predominantly my legs and my feet. And I found myself, I'm in rural Thailand on an island off the coast. So there's no hospital. There's a moped ride down a dirt path to a one-room nursing station. It was a bad deal. And the worst part about it is the doctor walks in around day 3, day 4, and he looks at me in the eye and he goes, "Hey, Colin, I hate to tell you this, but you'll probably never walk again normally. Your legs are so badly burned with your ligaments, your knee joints, your ankle joints, like you're not going to get full mobility back." Thankfully, there is a heroine to this story, which is my incredible mother, the same one who wanted to birth me on a futon on a hippie commune in Olympia, Washington.
Mom's pretty awesome, isn't she?
Yeah. Yeah, she's cool. She's a cool lady for sure. And
most people have gender reveal parties, and she just had a human reveal party.
Exactly. Hey, we're having what are you guys doing tonight? We're having a baby. Come on over. I like that.
Jack's in the cabinet.
Yeah. So anyways, I don't know, as a mother, I can only imagine what it's like to see your kid in Thailand not being able to walk, this horrible diagnosis. And she tells me now she was crying and pleading with the doctors for any semblance of good news, not getting it. But she didn't show me that fear. You know, she came into my hospital room every day with this huge smile on her face and this air of positivity, kind of daring me to dream about the future. It's a concept I talk about in the book now. I didn't call it at the time, but I call it a possible mindset, you know, an empowered way of thinking that locks a life of limitless possibilities. Just she's like, yeah, you screwed up. Yep, you burned yourself. You're a dumb kid. You made a mistake, but like your life's not over. Like, what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't want to play this game, Mom, but she kind of forced me into to visualize anything. And I said, okay, this sounds ridiculous. I closed my eyes. I said, I just saw myself cross the finish line of a triathlon. And she could have easily said, like, you know, hey, you know, I said set a goal, but like the legs and what the doctor said, like maybe something a little more realistic.
It's a little bit of an obstacle right now.
Yeah. She's like, nah, cool. In fact, you know what? Let's start training right now. Right now. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She goes, hey, doc, my son's training for a triathlon. Bring him in some weights. And I got this picture. I'm bandaged from the waist down. There's like blood and pus seeping through the gauze on my legs. But I'm lifting these 10-pound dumbbells. And this Thai doctor's looking at me like, this stupid American kid's telling me he's training for a triathlon and knock some sense into this knucklehead. But you know, it was fixed in my mind. And fast forward, you know, it was 18 months later, it was 3 months later that I left Thailand. Still couldn't walk. I was carried on and off the plane. I was in a wheelchair when I got home. Slowly, my mom helped me learn how to walk, one step at a time, had some good occupational therapists and stuff. And then eventually I moved to Chicago to try to, you know, get a job. You know, I know you guys are connected with Jay Cutler. It was actually right when Jay got the quarterback job for the Bears, literally that year, 2008, 2009, when I moved there for that job. I remember seeing him out at some nightclubs, actually, funny enough, in my early 20s.
That's a shocking statement right there. We are floored by that one.
So same era as that. But during that time, other than when I was clubbing with Jay, I basically said I want to race this triathlon. So I started training. You know, I could barely walk and then could jog a little bit, rehab. But I ended up racing the Chicago Triathlon and finished the race 18 months after being told I'd never walk again. But the kicker is I actually didn't just finish the race, but I won the entire Chicago Triathlon. And I know it's somewhat of a long-winded story, like how'd you get into adventure? Like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, burn yourself in a fire in Thailand. But for me, it's this massive turning point in my young life. Like, had my mom not instilled that mindset in me in that moment, that turning point, like we wouldn't be having this conversation. Or, you know, I sit here very humbly with 10 world records, but I always remind people, like, I set those 10 world records after being born. It's not after being burned, excuse me. You know, not before. And I've come to realize, you know, for me, sometimes our hardest moments, the most difficult things we go through, I wouldn't wish the pain of that on my worst enemy, but it also sure as shit taught me some of life's greatest lessons, and I'm stronger for it. And so that set me off on a life of curiosity about pushing the limits of human potential. What am I capable of? I raced triathlon professionally for a number of years after that, and then went on to basically go after all these big expeditions, which has been the better part of the last decade.
I know Wes has a question, but I want to just say this real quick. Your accomplishments are mind-boggling and jaw-dropping and whatnot, and we'll dive into those. But your mother's influence and your mother's passion for not allowing you to settle, it just speaks so loudly and with so much resounding volume of a parent's influence on a young person. And you weren't a kid at that point. You were a grown-ass man at that point. But her coming there, getting on an airplane, flying to a foreign country, showing up, seeing her little boy burnt to a crisp, and her instant reaction to that is, you ain't done. You're going to do great things, so you may as well snap out of the pity party right now, because I'm not having it. I think that is such a beautiful testament to their influence in our lives. So thank you for sharing that. All right, Wes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
You write in the book just about how, you know, you're pushing yourself and how this discomfort really unlocks these possibilities in your life. But how much of this is you wanting to prove what you can do versus I want to beat the shit out of planet Earth, because that's what it feels like. It feels like you have like this Michael Jordan meme of your life. You've taken this personal, and now you just want to prove to the planet, hey, I can climb your mountains. I can row across your Drake Passage. I can walk across Antarctica. Is there any part of you that, you know, is fueled by it seems like you're competing against the planet right now?
That's a good way. I'm not sure anyone's ever said that to me before, but that's an interesting take on that. You know, there's no doubt in my mind, you know, high performance in sport and pushing myself has always been a goal. You know, as a little kid, I was always dreamed of swimming in the Olympics, or when I raced triathlon professionally, I wanted to make, you know, I've always wanted to, you know, kind of push myself at the highest level. But interestingly enough, like switching away from, I guess, quote unquote, more traditional sports or Olympic path or something like that, not to knock that path, but you know, the outdoors and Mother Nature is like the final decision maker, right? You know, it's like when you're on the, you know, running track and field or in a swim race or whatever, you know, there's rules, there's regulations, there's a judge, there's a this. Like when you're out there pulling the 375-pound sets solo across Antarctica, I'll tell you who the judge is: Mother Nature. Like a 75-mile-per-hour headwind when, you know, minus 40 degrees outside, like, you know, there's no just raising your hand and be like, yeah, I'm not having a good race today, let me just step off the track. Like you're in it, right? You're fully immersed. And so for me, you know, that was the next level, then the next layer of that, you know, truly life or death stakes. But what's interesting is that, you know, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that, you know, sure, there's parts of me that, you know, my ego want to prove that, get these world records, you know, that certainly have been a driving force in the past. But it's interesting that it's become a little bit more of an inward, or a little more, for lack of a better word, spiritual journey for me. You know, it's what am I capable of? And moreover, you know, with the 12-hour walk, the new book, it's how can I transmute that to inspire people at scale? Because what I've realized is, you know, people can read, you know, you're very kind to read the resume and all that kind of stuff and be like, all right, well, this dude just must be like some superhuman guy that's just different than the rest of us. But what I've come to realize, honestly, and I fundamentally believe this is not just lip service, that all of us, every single human walking this planet, that we have reservoirs of untapped potential inside of us. And I love to say that the most important muscle any of us has is the 6 inches between our ears. But the problem is in our modern society, we don't often enough flex and develop that. You know, we sit comfortably, you know, don't get me wrong, I'm on social media, but we too often just scroll on social media, binging Netflix, like just kind of being life on autopilot. And so for me, it's a passion for saying, hey, I love exploring these places, but can I share that with the world in a way that has impact? I mean, for me, I sort of think about life on the scale of 1 to 10. You know, 1 being our lowest moments. You know, burning myself in that fire in Thailand was for sure 1. And 10 being these peak moments of life, you know, high achievement, or whether that's falling in love, or the day your first child is born, or having amazing sex, or skiing perfect path. We know what 10s are, right? They're epic moments, right? We love 10s. Everyone loves a good 10, right? Like, you know, that's what's up. But here's the thing. Every time I've reached these peak arcs, these peak moments in my life, these 10s, at first I was like, I'm trying to avoid the 1 so I can get the 10s. But I've realized that every 10 that I've experienced in my life is actually because of 1s, not in spite of 1s, right? And too often I find that people, you know, and sometimes I'm guilty of this, but I really try not to be. More often than not, I'm not. But people at scale are stuck in what I call the zone of comfortable complacency. This 4 to 6 range, where it's like, you got a job, it's fine, you go to work, like, you don't love it, you don't hate it, like, like, all right, cool. Or you're in a relationship and like, you know, it's not like toxic, it's not abusive, but you know, you're just cohabitating, coexisting. It's like 5 day, you know, day after day, year after year, 5. And because people are so afraid to take any sort of risk or accept any sort of discomfort in their life, they're just sitting in the zone of comfortable complacency. But when you hedge against those 1s, that downside risk, you also take off the table the 10s, the opportunity to feel that full zest of life. And so, you know, for me, and a lot of my mission is not to say some sadistic, masochistic, go beat yourself up, but it's say, you got to step outside that comfort zone. You got to take some of those risks. You got to do things that are different and shake it up, because that actually unlocks the door to those 10s. And so me against the world has just been a way for me to learn that lesson. And when I've learned in those lessons of rowing that boat across Drake Passage, walking, you know, solo across Antarctica for 54 days, in those depths of those moments, I've actually been able to retrain my mind to embrace those those ones. Not like I'm loving it. Not like I'm loving this, freezing cold, afraid feeling inside of me, but I go, ooh, cool. Well, if this is happening, that must mean on the other side of it, I'm opening the door to these 10s. I'm opening the door to these peak arcs of life.
I love it. Yeah, it's you said a couple things there that made me think about other folks I've interviewed. I was talking to Rory McIlroy, the PGA star, once, and he was saying to me about that space between your ears, that the most difficult golf course on the planet is the 6-inch track between your ears, because it is such a mentally exhausting challenge to win major championships. And then you discuss complacency. I asked Nick Saban once, what is the greatest threat to excellence? And he said complacency. It is the blatant disregard for doing what's right. And it's fascinating to me how their tutelage and your experience are so in line with one another. I want to discuss something that really hit me very early in the book, was you discussing going to that dinner with all those fancy pants Fortune 50 CEOs or whomever they were, and feeling out of place and feeling like it wasn't your people, especially. But when you're leaving the dinner, having a eureka moment and a tremendous moment of clarity when someone in their 80s walks up to you, damn near in tears, who desperately needed to hear your message, who desperately needed to see exactly what you just said to us. The willingness to challenge self and not sit and be comfortable is vital if we want to live our fullest life and become our truest self. I want you to share. I don't want you to give away your book, but
yeah.
That was a beautiful moment to read, in my estimation. Share with us what that taught you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason I opened the book that way. And if we share a little bit about the first story, hopefully that just piques people's interest to say, I want to go buy the whole rest of the book, because the
I'm an
stories
author
continue
too.
to flow.
I understand you don't want to give away your whole.
No, it's good. No, it's
deal.
good, man. I opened the book there for a reason, because I think it's a great framing on everything that I stand for. And it was, like you said, a perfect eureka moment for me. So as you said, I'm in this fancy Manhattan penthouse, and I usually just come as I am. So I showed up in a black T-shirt and jeans, and I get to this fancy pants doorman, and the first thing he says to me is, he goes, "I've told you this before. If you're with catering, you got to use the service elevator." And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm expected at the penthouse, and he's like just looking at me, like just eyeing me, like
mashed taters go in back there, bud.
Yeah, exactly. And they finally do let me up there, but sure enough, I walk into this room. I'm giving a speech to about 500 Wall Street guys, but they invited me to this kind of smaller dinner with like 8 to 10 folks, like CEOs, big hedge fund managers, super successful guys, all like in their 60s, 70s, 80s. But of course, they're suited and booted. They got the custom suits and the $100,000 watches, and we know the New York finance kind of vibe. Nothing wrong with that necessarily, but just not exactly my normal dinner table hang. So we have a great conversation. We're having a great conversation, and one of my favorite questions, they're asking me all the time, oh, did you see dead bodies when you're up there on Everest? Like, did you, what was it like rowing across the Drake Passage? Man,
Did you?
Did I? Yeah, I did see dead bodies up there. Yep. And I've been on the mountain when people have died. Not anyone I was with on Everest, fortunately, but yeah, it's a dangerous place, so no doubt. Anyways, so they're asking me those same types of questions, and we're going back and forth, sharing stories, stuff like that. And sometimes when one of my favorite questions to ask, I have a nonprofit where I ask this to school kids, and my public speaking at big companies ask this question. I think it's just a good question. It says, look, hey, my childhood dream was to climb Mount Everest, and I've been fortunate to climb that mountain twice. But what's your Everest? Or what was your Everest? What's your Everest? It's just like a thought starter around. It's an obvious metaphor. I can say it to an 8-year-old. He understands what I'm saying. An 8-year-old's like, my Mount Everest to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, or to make sure the snow leopards are off the endangered species list. Thousands I've heard thousands of kids answer this question. It's always fun, but adults have great questions, answers this question too often. These guys were gregarious and confident and excited, and I asked this question, and it's crickets. These dudes are just kind of looking around, we've all been at a dinner where someone says some awkward comment, and it just kind of and I'm like, wow, didn't expect that, but we kind of just brushed past it.
Take a little sip.
Yeah, exactly. Take a little sip and just kind of look in the other direction. And it's like, oh, I did not realize that was going to not land here. Okay, whatever. But as you mentioned, Marty, I'm getting ready to leave at the end of the dinner, and this older gentleman, I peg him, 75, 80 years old, comes up and he taps me on the shoulder, says, can I have a minute? And we have this conversation, and he's nearly crying, and he says to me, he goes, I'm sorry about myself and my friends here. You asked us an important question, and none of us answered. He's like, but I've been thinking about it ever since. And then he says to me, he goes, look, as you can tell, I've made more money than you can possibly imagine in my life. He goes, but there's not a single day that I don't go back in my mind to this moment when I was a kid at the summer camp in the Catskills on a rowboat, and the peace and the simplicity of that. And he goes, in that moment, I realized I stopped asking myself that question of what do I want? What do I care about? What's my Everest? And he's looking at me and he basically says, man, I wonder where life would have turned out for me had I asked myself that question sooner. And it was so interesting because obviously this guy's the classic archetype of the guy who has it all, the quote unquote, success, master of the universe, whatever. And he was sharing this vulnerable moment with me of like, man, I missed it. I missed some of, and I think what's interesting is that question, what's your Everest? It's meant to be open-ended because it's like, my Everest is not your Everest. It doesn't, you make $1 million, save 1 million lives. It's not to vilify this guy for making a lot of money. That wasn't the point of this, but it's to say, you can look at someone from the outside and think this, but inside, if they're not living their truth, their passion, taking the risks, climbing their own mountain, you can end up on the top of a bunch of other mountains. But if that's not your Everest, if that's not your passion, your heart, your soul, then you end up as an 80-year-old man in a fancy Manhattan penthouse, full of regret. And I think that's probably not the life best lived.
That's the scariest thing. To me, that is a terrifying prospect. It is a terrifying prospect to fall into the rhythm of what you're supposed to be in society's eye versus what you're supposed to be in your soul. And that just... I hope I'm never in that position. I try to live my life in a way that I'm not. But look, man, there are plenty of moments right now. I'm 46 years old, man. I'm full of gratitude for my success professionally. I'm full of gratitude for my family life. But there are many. Hi, guys. I tape in a coffee shop, Colin. People say hello all the time.
I love it.
I'm in a moment now where I'm constantly self-evaluating. Not in terms of what success is supposed to be, but fulfillment. Mm-hmm. I want fulfillment, man. I'm damn near at the century mark. It scares the hell out of me to be that guy you met at that dinner.
I mean, it literally, the first line of my book, literally first sentence one of the book is, what if I told you I found a way for you to live a more fulfilling life? And I open with that for a reason because I think in the end of the day, that's mostly what we're chasing. And that's to say fulfillment can come in the form of financial success. That can come in the form of family. That can come in the form of anything, right? But what is that for you? And more importantly, this 12-hour walk, this invitation to take this journey of your own into your mind, which is accessible to anyone, is meant as a reset. Is meant as a reset to say, don't wait until you're 80 to look back on your life and go, oh man, I missed it. Check in with yourself. Take these moments in time, these inflection points. The subtitle of the book is Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, Unlock Your Best Life. Because it's like you can really look deeply inside of yourself and make small pivots. If you reorient, 3% this way, 5% this way, but over time, consistently, you end up where you want to be going. But if you let a decade go by, I'll get to this by the time I retire and so I can hit the golf course and blah, 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 you run out of time, man. You run out of time.
I won't ask you to share this. I'll say it quickly so Wes can get to his next question. But so you guys watching and listening know, Colin devised this 12-hour walk in a moment almost every one of us lived and can relate to. That was during the COVID pandemic, during lockdown, during isolation, when he was caught in the doldrums of the insecurity of, oh my gosh, what if this is my life for the rest of time? I'm sitting here sleeping late. I start drinking too early. The whole thing that many of us lived. That was the same life a lot of us lived. And one day he woke up and said, this is not how I'm going to be. And he handed his wife his cell phone and went for a walk. And 12 hours later he came home. And he had a revelation during that time. And that was the manifestation of this beautiful philosophy and text that he has that you guys, again, can get today. So make sure you do that. It's fascinating. All right, I'll shut up. Wes, go ahead.
There are so many great stories in the book, and, we've touched on a few of them, but I am most intrigued by your coach, Mike McCassell, and the workouts he puts you through. I mean, we don't all have access to those kinds of workouts, but in a weird way, when I'm reading them, because they're so different, they almost sound fun.
Yeah.
But what is a day with McCassell like, dude? This guy is, I mean, you're a badass. Don't get me wrong. But this guy is like, he can't be human.
They're only fun if you're demented like Colin.
Yeah, so Mike McCassell, man, that guy is a legend, a legend among legends. So just a quick, you teed off my resume. Mike McCassell's resume is insane. He held the world pull-up record, 5,806 pull-ups in 21 hours, while also wearing a 30-pound weight vest just for fun. Like, I could do like 9 pull-ups or something like that.
He beat David Goggins, didn't he?
Yeah, he beat Goggins' record by 1,500 pull-ups or something like that.
I didn't think anybody could
like
beat
Travis
that, man.
on a Saturday night.
What else? I mean, he's done wild. He pulled a F-250 truck by himself 20 miles across Death Valley with 120
Did it break
degrees.
down?
Yeah, he was like, oh, break down. I just pull this thing back to
something?
Vegas or something like that. That's an even crazier story because he didn't even barely tell anyone. This is how low key this guy is. He flies to Vegas and goes to the rental car office in Vegas and says, I need to rent a truck, and then drives a rental F-150 truck. It's not like there's a big camera crew, but whatever. And then just pulls it off of the side of the road in Death Valley and just rocks this for 20. He's a badass, but he's also just low key. He's just anyways, his resume is insane. He's done all these world records and badass, but I actually didn't know him by reputation. But we got introduced to each other when I was starting to think about training for Antarctica, my solo crossing of Antarctica. And this guy at gym, I was looking for someone to train me. And this guy's like, a friend of mine says, I know a guy. He's an incredible trainer. You guys should meet each other. And when you just sit down with someone 1 minute in and you're like, man, we are forever kindred spirit brothers, to the end of time. We both just felt it. It was just unspoken. It was oh, I get you. Because he was like, hey, man, I'm trying to pull this sled across Antarctica by myself and this. And we're not riffing on resume. He just looks at me. He's like, I understand. Let's get to work. Just like that. And what's interesting is about some of these projects I've done, particularly the solo Antarctica crossing, and I was also the first person to row this boat across Drake Passage with my team, the most treacherous stretch of ocean in the world, is that there's when you do something, I've set some 10 world records, but those 2 are also world firsts. No one's ever done this, which means there's not a blueprint. As genius as you mentioned Saban before, Saban is a genius among genius in college football, but there exists a tutelage before that, people to learn from, people have right, and then you improve on it. But when you're doing a world first, you can't call anyone up and be like, yo, so when you walked across Antarctica solo, how did you train for this? How did that work? And I think for a lot of trainers and a lot of coaches, that might be a little bit overwhelming. But McCassell was like, whatever, man. If we can't go to Antarctica to train, I'm bringing Antarctica to you. And so he did put me through these crazy workouts. He would have me. He'd be like, okay, Colin. Well, I think you might die out there. Let's just be honest. You could die out there. How might you die? Okay, you're at the end of a long day. You're tired. You got to tie these knots to get your tent in place. You don't have an extra tent. If that tent blows away, it's 50 miles per hour wind. Your tent blows away. You're dead. You're alone in Antarctica. There's no one coming to get you. So we got to make sure you're dialed for that. I'm like, okay, how do you train that? And he's like, all right, put your foot in these put your hands in these ice buckets. So he's got me doing a plank in my hands in ice buckets and push-ups and planks until I can barely, I'm so out of breath and my hands are completely frozen. And then he's like, don't take your hands out until I let you. Push-ups, planks, your hands are in there. And all of a sudden he's like, all right, do a wall sit. Get out, do a wall sit, but now my feet are in the ice buckets. And he goes, you can't take your feet out of these ice buckets until you solve this. And he puts a weight plate on my knees because I'm doing a wall set. And then he hands me a Lego box, a literal Lego box like you would have this shit. And he goes, there's 16 steps in this, and here's the instructions. A 9-year-old should be able to solve this, but you can't get your feet out of there until you solve this. My hands are frozen, and at the same time, he's yelling at me in my ear, and he goes, you got to answer my questions. What's 9 times 9? What's 100 times this? Who was the president in 1965? Who was this? Because he's trying to
build this table from IKEA.
Exactly. So I mean, it sounds crazy.
Build this bike while singing Working Man's PhD.
Exactly. So I'll tell you what. that moment did happen. My previous book, The Impossible First, I actually opened with a scene where I let go of my tent accidentally and almost flies away late in the day. And he is just a master of figuring out how to train the body, the mind in these unique ways. I'll give you another one, which is Drake Passage. I'm doing this rowing project, and I'm a pretty novice rower when I set out to set this world record. But he's like, all right, man, we trained you up for Antarctica. No one had done this. Now let's figure out how to train you how to row a boat across this most dangerous ocean in the world. It's 40-foot swells. There's icebergs. The Drake Passage is straight up like this from southern tip of South America to Antarctica. It's cold. It's brutal. And I'm going to be in an open hull rowboat. So, there's nothing protecting me from the elements. It's a 28-foot long, but it only rides about 3 feet off the water. And so I'm just going to get, taking these waves in the face for day after day after day after day. And so I'm thinking, how is he going to simulate this? But I was like, he's always got some crazy plan. He's like, all right, man, we do some gym sessions, just normal stuff, whatever. And then we have like a normal schedule, what I forget, Tuesdays, Wednesday, whatever our session is. And all of a sudden, it's like the middle of the night. I'm sleeping in my house in Portland, Oregon with my wife, Jenna. And all of a sudden, 2 a.m., McCassell, I feel these two hands on my shoulders just shaking me. I'm like, I must be dreaming. He's like, get up. It's time to get to work. I'm like, what? He's in my bedroom. Obviously, my wife had arranged this with him and given him a key. And he's like, it's time to get to work, man. And so he pulls me outside in my backyard. It's dark. It's the middle of the night. And he's set up a rowing machine. But you guys know what a Bosu ball is? Like the half balls that you like balance on in the gym? So he set up on 4 Bosu balls a rowing machine. And I get on there and he goes, start rowing like as fast as you can. So I'm grinding. I'm like literally like in my, barely just like washing the sleep out of my eyes. And I'm rowing. And now all of a sudden it's on Bosu balls. So he starts shaking it. He's like, you think the Drake Passage is rough? And he's shaking this rowing machine. So it's bouncing all over the place. And I'm like bouncing all over the place, middle of the night, rowing this boat. And then all of a sudden I look over and he's got a couple of these 5-gallon buckets of ice water. And he's like, you're not stopping for the next 2 hours. And he just starts dumping literally bucket after bucket of ice. Keep rowing. Keep this. You're going to be sleep deprived. You're going to be tired. You think this is your backyard, man? There's going to be 40-foot swells. So anyways, I could go on and on. Bottom line is Mike McCassell is an absolute badass. If you don't know him, look him up on Instagram. He's a legend. One of them also, even though I'm making him sound like this, like kind of like militant badass, he's also one of those most soft-spoken, chill, low-key, kind, big-hearted dudes you will ever meet.
Dude, he looks like he could be the manager at like a Best Buy. Like he's the most unassuming looking dude, but he's also like the greatest personal trainer or the worst personal trainer, depending on your preference. Of all time.
He's the man. And I love how you said that. Almost sounds fun. I would say the same. There's some one moments in there, but at the end of the day, the training and working out with him, he's taken me to the next level. There's no doubt about it.
Really appreciated that part of the book, though. Like you've done amazing things, some really cool stories, but I liked the behind the scenes of like, okay, I didn't just do this by myself. Like I needed some help, and I appreciated that. That was cool.
The 100%. Absolute worst part of reading about the Drake Passage was reading about your sleeping quarters when the conditions got a bit too rough and you're laying in vomit with no room to move. Dude.
That also sounds like Travis on Saturday night.
I was on an airplane to Nashville, Tennessee, sitting in first class with a cocktail. The most bougie thing ever, reading about you and your boy crammed in this hole together in the fetal position. Y'all got to read this book. It'll make you feel really small. All right, I got a million questions, but we'll get you out of here on this. So K2 kills 1 in 6, right? Who attempt to climb this beast. You've lost friends there yourself. Put me in the mind of an adventurer for a moment. Why do odds like that entice people like you? And how do you carry those guys with you on your next forays, on your subsequent forays?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, K2, for those that don't know, the K2 is the second tallest mountain in the world. So Everest, of course, is the tallest. K2 is the second tallest. It's in Pakistan, rural Pakistan, in a mountain range called the Karakoram. It's over 28,000 feet high, huge mountain. But even though it's the second tallest, it's much more dangerous than Everest. Everest is already quite dangerous, but K2, in terms of the route and the steepness and the rock fall, and I mean, it's just a much more complicated mountain to climb. So for a lot of mountaineers, myself included, it sort of lived in the zeitgeist of your mind as like the real, the world knows about Everest, but the mountaineers are like K2, that's the one. What we were attempting over there actually was something, and it sounds even more ridiculous. Those odds are correct. About 20% of people that summit K2 have died. But that's in the summer season. Now, K2, up to this point, had never been summited in winter. And so we were actually attempting to climb K2 in the dead of winter, kind of upping the stakes. It's a hard one to answer because, as you mentioned, I won't go into all the details. You should check out the book. But I lost some friends over there in a series of bad accidents, which is, inevitably not that surprising given what the stakes are going over there. So your question is, well, why the hell go over there in the first place? Like, why you read that, should that be like, well, then don't go there? Most rational minds would say that. I don't know if I have the number one best answer to this question, other than to say, I can remember when I was 13 years old, I read a book by John Krakauer called Into Thin Air. You guys familiar with that book?
Yep, yeah, absolutely.
It's a book about an Everest climbing disaster. 8 people die. Really tragic story. And funny enough, I remember reading that book and feeling terrible for all the people and the families and the loss and the sadness. But I also remember setting that book down going, I want to go there someday. I want to go there someday. And it would be easy to frame that and say, oh, that's just some sick thing in your brain that's like, people die, you want to go check that out. But I also think, people have asked me often, they say, Colin, are you afraid of dying? Are you afraid of dying? And I thought about that question a lot. And the short answer is, yeah, man, I'm afraid of dying. I don't want to die. And having experienced now death up close, losing friends, there's not a day that goes by that, I tear up driving in my car sometimes, man, like thinking about my buddies that I never get to see again. It's horrible. That sadness, that trauma, that never goes away. But I also say this, my bigger fear is not living. My bigger actual fear is not living. My bigger fear is being that old gentleman at the Manhattan penthouse going, I read books and then I thought, nah, I'm not going to go there. So it's a balance, man. It's a dance. I want to be an old man. And I've had a visualization of myself as an old man holding my wife's hand. We're 90 years old, surrounded by kids and grandkids and a full life, going, wow, what a ride. What a ride. So maybe it's me wanting my cake and eat it too, man. I want to be an old man one day, but I want to be an old man thinking, I lived.
You got time? I know we got to let you run. There's 2 more that I got to ask.
Let's go.
Number 1, how is the next adventure devised? I have this vision of you and your boys sitting around slamming cold beers and playing like I Dare You and being like, all right, I dare you to load up a sled and sled by yourself across a continent, and it's never been done before, and you're like, all right, hell, that sounds fun. Sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. I know it's probably extremely meticulous, as you were talking about with the training process, every single T and I, right? But how do you come up with this stuff?
Yeah, there's no scientific process. It's what piques my curiosity. What parts of the world haven't I explored? But honestly, more importantly, what parts of myself haven't I explored? Right? How can I go deeper? How can I go into that mind, body, spirit? And it's fun. You asked a question earlier, Wes did, sort of about what drives me. Is it just the next record? Is it the ego? Is it the completion, the achievement? And one of the benefits, I think, in my life at this point of having had, a decent level of success is I actually don't feel pressured by that anymore. It's more like, man, like what's going to light me up and who can I share that experience with, both, in a larger sense, they're writing books and sharing stories, but also in that moment, like who do I want to be on that expedition with? Who do I want to have a life experience with? Because this, whether that's your professional life or whatever, when you have like a ride or die friend or community, or you have these experiences together, like you're bound to that person forever through these memories. And so even at that point, I mean, it sounds silly, but that's part of it. Like who's crazy enough to want to go suffer with me in some wild ass, corner of the world. And so there's no playbook there. To me, it's not, I don't think of myself as Evel Knievel. And I love Evel Knievel, from back in the day. But I think that there was a little bit of that, which was like a stunt. Oh, what's my next stunt? What's your next magic trick?
You should do your next stunt dressed as Evel Knievel.
Exactly. So it's actually... So I was waiting to tell you guys, I haven't told anyone this, but it's this. I'm going to pull my sled across Antarctica the other way wearing the Evel Knievel costume. So that's the next big thing. But no, and I say this with all sincerity, answering that question myself, it's kind of what's your Everest? I asked that to the room of guys, I asked it to tons of people. I got to ask myself that question over and over again. Colin, well, what's your next Everest? And that's been an iterative of these different things. But truthfully, in this moment, and look, I've got some big badass expeditions planned, no doubt about it, and I'll share it with everyone. But my next Everest in this moment, not just because I'm on book tour right now, but truthfully, in my heart, is to inspire 10 million people to take the 12-hour walk. I think this is an accessible thing. Pick up the book. You'll understand more about it. But it is something that all of us can do. You don't have to fly to Antarctica. You don't have to try to climb Everest. You can literally do this thing right out your front door, and it will have a lasting impact. And the world that I say that, maybe it's selfishly, but the world that I want to live in, I want to live in a world where more people, millions more people, are equipped with a possible mindset, are no longer living this life in a zone of comfortable complacency stuck between 4 and 6. And I have come up with a way for people to snap out of that in a single day. And so, just like I said, maybe it's selfish, but I want my friends, my neighbors, the world to be lit up by more people taking on these adventures and these challenges. And you can literally do what I'm talking about right out your front door. So my next Everest is that, man. I'm passionate about it and spreading that word.
Anybody can do it. That's one part of the book that resonated with me as well. You don't have to be a phenomenal athlete. You don't have to be in the greatest shape in the world, but you just got to unplug and walk out the front door. Brother, thank you so much for your spirit. You've impacted us so deeply today, and I'm full of gratitude for your time. I know doing book tours, you're probably doing 1 million of these, and spending 45 minutes with one bunch of idiots is a lot to ask. So thank you, brother. Best of luck with the book. Everybody go get it, the 12-hour walk. Go get it right now. Colin, thanks so much, brother. Good luck in your future adventures.
My pleasure. Thanks,
you,
guys,
Colin.
for spending the morning. Yeah, appreciate you.